Hello,
Leah, hi.
everyone. I'm Leah Hines, Executive Director for the Charleston Conference, and I'd like to welcome all of you to today's webinar, Opportunities and Challenges in Disseminating Pre-Published Research. Before we get started with the session, I have just a few housekeeping announcements, some technical instructions here for using Zoom if you've never used it before. It's pretty simple. It'll prompt you to connect by audio. So the computer audio is going to be your best quality. There's also a telephone option if that's giving you some issues. Here at the bottom of the screen, you'll see some icons. There's one to raise your hand. If you click it, it turns green, and then you can click it again to lower your hand. Sometimes the best way, if you have a technical issue or an audio problem, you can just use this chat, the attendee chat, and send a message directly to me, to Leah Hines, or to the presenters, and we'll help you get straightened out as soon as we can. There's also a button for Q&A. We're going to hold questions for our presenters till the end of the session. So as something comes up, if you have a question or a comment, you can click Q&A, input your questions and comments there, hit send, and it will go to us and we'll save those till the very end. And we'll try to get to as many questions and comments as we can. There's also an option here for full screen or to make the screen smaller, the original size, so you can choose the option that's best for you. With that, I'm going to get to a few introductions. We are joined today by Sami Benchekroun, co-founder and CEO of Morressier. Hi, Sami. Thanks for joining us.
Hello. Thank you to be here. Good to be here.
And next, Mike Morisson, who is a PhD student in work psychology and a former user experience designer. Mike will speak after Sami. Hi, Mike.
Hello.
And finally, Jaap van Netten, senior researcher and academic clinician at Amsterdam UMC and adjunct associate professor at Queensland University of Technology. Hi, Jaap. Thanks for being here.
Hello. Good to see you guys.
Great. Before Sami gets started with his presentation, I have a quick question for the audience. Let's see here. Do you have a strategy for your institution's pre-published research? If you could just take a moment to select yes or no, let us know going into this what's your, if you have a strategy in place currently for pre-published research. And while that poll is going, Sami, I'm going to stop my slide share and let you take over with your slides here. And the poll will continue, so you can just either minimize after you vote or drag that out of the way there. All right, thanks. And with that, I'll turn off my camera and mic, and I'll be here to answer questions in, in the chat if needed. Thanks, everybody.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction. Just to kick things off, just a very short introduction. So my name is Sami, and I am one of the founders of Morressier. But I'm just to make that very clear from the get-go, I'm not here as a commercial vendor or a commercial participant in that group. I really just want to open up this area of pre-published documents, early stage research, and the presentation showcases basically all these parts in that world. So all my presentation actually start with that one question, and the question is always about how do we look for the latest information these days, and that's the question that I'm asking myself all the time, and essentially always when asking people, it's always the same answer, right? It's always that answer that says, hey, these days I actually Google everything. We type in everything. The newest suggestion for restaurants around the corner, or the latest soccer results. So I tend to Google everything, and people around me do the same. And now just let us think just for a minute or for 30 seconds about what would happen if these wonderful first search results, these first 2, 3, 4 pages on Google would not be there, and your search query would actually look a little bit like that. So completely empty pages. So you cannot really see what's happening right now, but only really something that happens in the back of the Google results, right? And essentially, this is when we look into scholarly communication, that's a little bit what happens in the industry. So this graph basically showcases the process of research as it happens. There's a lot of ups and downs, a lot of backs and forths. And in the end, the goal is to be published in one of the great journals out there, and that's the moment where results are actually accessible. So in the format of a publication, in the format of nowadays a preprint even, but in the entire process before it is very tough and very hard to access it during the process. So it's really tough for me to see data sets from all around the world, or conference abstracts or presentations or posters. So it's a really tough thing to do, especially in a scientific process that goes up to 2 to 3 years, and in some disciplines even 4 to 5 years. So a vast chunk of that entire process is really not accessible. And when looking into where actually early stage research and preliminary results are being shared, you'll find conferences being a very, very important element. And conferences, you go to the conference, people go, researchers get up to date on a conference, they can communicate with their peers, they can discuss, there's a huge communication happening on the conference. But unfortunately, these conferences, they are quite offline, right? So there's a poster that is being brought to the conference, or there's a USB key brought to the conference. So everything happens on that conference. And I've brought just 2 little examples here. So this is one picture, or this is another picture. And quite frankly, most of the conferences look quite similar. So just generally, accessing scholarly content more upstream is actually quite difficult, be it the posters that I've just showcased you in the 2 pictures, or be it presentations or data set. Everything that is upstream, more upstream from the publication or the preprint, seems to be quite difficult to actually get your hands on. It's extremely difficult, but extremely important. Actually, that wonderful study of Ithaca shows that researchers go on conferences and workshops to keep up to date, and that is the number one location, basically, to get up to speed, to discuss, to exchange, and to get novel research. So I would love to just give you a couple of numbers here when it comes to the world of conferences. So if you look to research and a walk through one of the larger conferences out there would be something where they face 2,000 or 3,000 posters sometimes, where they can consume hundreds of keynote sessions. And the problem there is that these results are only being showcased in a 2 to 3, sometimes 4-day event. But it's a very condensed manner to have the necessity to actually look into all these documents. So it's very hard to get your hands on current posters, on current presentations from these conferences. So the big problem is that me as a researcher, I cannot really go to all these conferences. It's absolutely impossible. I have a limited time to travel, and quite frankly, these conferences happen all around the world, and the budgets are also quite limited. So what would be an interesting path to actually discover, and this is something that I would like to make the point here, is that documents shared on conferences around the world are actually a very essential and very important element in the path of the research process. And there's a couple of platforms out there where one can, on the one hand side, deposit early stage research, so that researcher can actually put their research out there in the form of poster and from a presentation. Some platform offers you to receive a DOI, so suddenly these elements are more embedded into this scholarly ecosystem. So the dissemination part is one, and then obviously also this discovery. So me as a researcher, I can then finally look into posters, presentations, and abstracts from conference, in some cases also data set. So that's one element that I that I would love to point out. And there's to that element, there's two worlds, right? There's one which is the challenges, which is something that we need to look into, and then there's the goal to move forward. So one larger challenge in the dissemination has been, and when we have been talking to quite some researchers out there, is there is this element of scooping, right? So how do we, how do we make sure that the research is something that that is not being taken over by others? There's the element of how conflicting is the relationship between a publication and a poster or presentation on the conference. Sometimes it holds sensitive data, and obviously one element is the quality control, and I just need to move that one window here because I don't see the other part. So the goals moving forward here, based on all these challenges, are we need to make sure that the transparency in that world is being increased, and there's a couple of elements that we can do. One is that we actually look into issuing DOIs more regularly for posters and presentations. We need to clearly, as a second point, really define this new type of scholarly output. Right now, we look into articles, we look into preprints, but everything before, we really haven't grasped if it's a data set or really some kind of new scholarly output. I'm making the point that it is a scholarly output because it wonderfully summarizes the current process. As a third element, we believe that we need to create incentive structures for actually sharing these early results. And I think there has been a lot of discussions lately on how to share early results, why to share data sets. Reproducibility is one element that I would just point out here. So incentive structure for sharing early results is a topic that we need to actually emphasize on. Another element is using tools like Authenticate for the plagiarism. And I mean that in both ways, saying once I upload a poster or a presentation, that it's actually in the Authenticate or in other platforms that would check the plagiarism. Another element is encourage the sharing of the failure and the successes, because in the end, researchers learn from both elements. And sharing the failure is also an element of efficiency. And I believe that this is something that funders out there can be an entity that would encourage basically sharing failures and successes. We also believe that we need to develop sort of quality assurance measure to see how can we assess the posters and presentations better. How can we actually use all the information that we have at hand to validate these results a little bit better. And I mean that not in the sense of full-fledged peer review, but some in a more subtle way. And then I obviously believe that we need to increase the discoverability of these early stage research elements like posters and presentations from the conferences. And we do this by actually putting them on platforms and issuing DOIs and so on and so forth, elements that I've mentioned before. And with that thought, I would love to give it over to Mike. Leah, I'm doing the transfer here, so I stopped my screencast. So thank you, first of all, for listening to me, and I'd love to hand it over to Mike here.
Thank you. And just very quickly before Mike comes on, I'm going to share the poll results. Our first poll, do you have a strategy for your institution's pre-published research? 19% said yes, 81% said no. So there's a clear need for strategy there. It's interesting to see that. And I'm going to show another poll here. Let's see here if I can get it to go. Poll 2, what type of pre-published research do you provide as an e-resource for your researchers? So you can click all that apply here: posters, presentations, data sets, preprints, or other. If there's something other, just let us know in the chat what that might be. We're interested to see that. And with that, I will turn it over to Mike. Again, this poll will stay open while Mike is presenting. Once you vote, you can minimize the window to get it out of your way. Thanks a lot. Take it away, Mike.
Okay, cool. Hi, guys. Let me get my screen shared here for a second. There we go. And hopefully everybody can see. You guys good, Leah?
Yep, thank
Okay,
you.
cool. Sure. So basically, as Sami alluded to, every field in science has poster sessions. Posters are actually, by the numbers, the biggest medium of science communication. They're even bigger than papers. And really, like, we try to transmit tens of thousands of findings to each other through posters every year. And the good news is that all of these posters, the bad and the good news is that all of these posters use basically the same approach to design. It's like this paper on a poster wall of text. But that's a huge opportunity. So since everybody uses this common approach to poster design, if we can improve the knowledge transfer efficiency of that design, even by a small amount, it could have these massive ripple effects across all of science. So that's the idea behind creating like a new default approach to posters. So as Sami mentioned, there's a lot of posters to process, and there's a couple ways you can solve that. One is to make the posters available through some platform like Sami's that would allow people to browse them outside the hour that they're given. The other approach, the one I've taken that's very complementary, I think, is to speed up the design of posters, to make them transmit information faster. So here's a typical poster. It's just sort of a wall of text. And really, like, there's this old joke where, it's kind of a dated joke, and I apologize in advance, but like, husband and a newlywed couple are spending their first night together, and the wife is cooking a roast for the husband, and the wife chops off the edges of the roast. Husband says, "Why do you do it that way?" And she said, "I don't know. My mom always did it that way." So the next family reunion, they ask mom, and her mom says, well, I don't know. Grandma always did it that way. So they ask grandma, and grandma says, "You guys are still chopping the edges off the roast? Like, I only did that when you were little because I had a pan that was too small and I had to chop it off to fit. There's no reason to do it." And like, that's kind of the way posters have evolved. Is like, originally poster sessions were for posters, and you had time to really sit there and read every poster like a paper. But really, in the years since, the size of poster sessions has grown hugely, and we need to start reapproaching the design of posters to fit it, because really there's such a logistical issue with, you can't really reduce the number of posters in the room, but so you really have to speed up the posters. And there's also just this underlying bad design. So scientists are really, really smart, brilliant, passionate people at the thing they do, but a lot of us have like no formal design training. So when we are asked to do a design task, what we do is we create designs that are what we understand, which is filling up pages and pages full of jargony text, so we get an A+ or we get the review approved and we don't look stupid, right? Which is sort of the opposite to the way designers are trained. Scientists were conditioned to, and we're rewarded for adding detail, for including that extra thing. And excluding something from a scientific paper is very punished. It's like, it feels like we're lying by omission. But in design, it's the opposite. Designers are trained to include only the minimum necessary information, and they're punished for adding too much because that overwhelms people. So we're really dealing with a lot of entrenched scientific training that's exactly the opposite of the training you want for good design. And scientists also think that, like me, beginner designers, they think that design is really just about making things look pretty. They don't realize that it can help them communicate information, which is, how all new designers, how people who aren't skilled in design usually think about design. And the other factor is that everybody copies each other. So this is sort of a picture of a scientist creating a poster. He starts with a template like this, and literally he'll have downloaded a template like this, and then he'll just copy and paste his own content into this. Like, there's not the creativity a lot of times just isn't there. Like, they'll just replace what someone else did. So there's a lot of conformity in science, and what you end up with is all posters looking pretty much the same. So these are real posters in this example. And like, the way you feel when you look at these posters, when you're like, okay, I can't really read any of that. You're maybe, if you focus on one of these posters, you'll probably pick out a couple words. And like, a lot of people will rationalize. You'll be like, oh, it's because I'm not a scientist. If I was a scientist, I would be able to absorb that entire wall of text in 3.5 seconds, I'm sure. But like, you couldn't. Like, nobody can. Like, everybody's working memory is limited. Everybody sees this as a wall of noise with 2 keywords they pick out. And it's really transmitting very inefficiently, because all these poster designs, what they're doing is people fill up the poster with text, because that makes them feel like they're showing that they did work, right? And they're covering all their bases like they've been trained to do. But what happens is, when you try to transmit 1,000 things at once, people's minds just turn it completely into noise and nothing gets through. So they're very inefficient trying to transmit 1,000 things and getting in 0 or maybe a couple keywords in the title. And research on posters shows that posters are basically not read at all. Like even if you set up posters in the lab, what they found is that people read like a couple words of the intro and the main findings, and then they ignore the entire rest of the poster. So the majority of content on most posters is completely wasted. It's completely ignored. And the scientist's perspective for that is like, well, it needs to be there, to cover our bases. But the designer perspective is if the information isn't used, there's no point in it being in the poster, and it's actually just cluttering up the information that should be there and preventing people from absorbing it. And the bigger problem here is that these overloading posters are such a time commitment that poster sessions, like you really only get 1 or 2 posters per session out of hundreds in an hour, right? Which is actually less efficient than if you think about a symposium where you're going to see 5 talks in an hour, right? Like I've heard that you can't really date posters like you should. You can't browse around and look at them. You have to sort of pick one to marry or pick 2 to marry. And like what that happens is that you get in this long conversation and you miss the rest of the posters in the room. Most scientists exit a poster session, and not only have they not not gotten something out of every poster, there are a majority of the posters in the room that they just straight missed. They didn't even look at. Their eyeballs never touched. And so just odds-wise, it's very unlikely that the most valuable poster in the room to you was on the posters you saw. It was probably on the ones you missed. So we're having all this misinsight in science right now. So we want to kind of fix that. And it's not anything mystical. It's just sort of a design problem. It's just scientists aren't trained for it. So we want to really create a poster session. Like the dream is to be able to walk into a poster session and actually get 50 insights about your field in an hour, which seems like a really impossible dream, but I'm interested to see how close we can get with better design. How much can we really maximize insight in poster sessions through design? Because if we could, and we could do it across fields, you're talking about increasing the amount of insight people get per poster session and the serendipity they experience across every field. So it's one of these rare opportunities we have in the world to actually not just speed up cures for a single disease, we can speed up cures for every single disease, all human progress, exploring the universe. Whatever you care about science fixing, we can make happen sooner through just better poster design. It sounds insane, but I think it's actually possible. And so I've tried to address this problem with something called user experience design, which some of you probably heard of it, but here's a quick example. Basically, it's not graphic design. So on the far left, you have a regular ketchup bottle. In the middle, you have sort of a graphic design ketchup bottle. It's like you can feel the chili peppers, but it's still just as frustrating to use as the original ketchup bottle. And on the right, you have a UX design ketchup bottle, a user experience design ketchup bottle. It's kind of ugly and weird looking, but it really helps you get the ketchup on the hot dog really quickly. And so that's what UX is about. It's about sort of solving frustrations and creating easier to use things more than it is about making things look visually emotional or directing your attention. So this is an example of sort of like that unicorn poster you see one of at every conference. This is a graphic design poster. It's very attractive. It has complementary colors, it has good alignment, but you'd have to spend 5 to 6 minutes with this to get anything out of it. And when you have 100 posters to browse in an hour, it's too slow. So what I did was earlier this year was I applied basically just one principle of user experience design, which is you want to put a lot of your design emphasis on what people need to know, and then you want to get to what's nice to know last, which is kind of the inverse of a scientific paper. A scientific paper, if you think about it, we really get to the point in like the last line of the discussion section, right? Whereas the whole front end is nice to know. So it's again the opposite of how we think in science. But I tried to apply this to a poster design. So earlier this year, I released a YouTube video that went kind of viral, very viral. And it proposes this design. Basically, it's like you have sections. You have the main finding in the middle that you can browse and scan quickly while you're walking by. On the right, you have your cheat sheet. This is where the presenter would stand on the right and he can point to things. And then on the left, you have something called the silent presenter bar. And so usually when people approach a poster, you stop reading because you're in the presenter's personal bubble. But if you put your summary, like a visual abstract, far enough away, what you'll have is people will stand away from the presenter. People have called this like the introvert bar, and they'll read silently and then they'll approach and ask questions. So this was just sort of a new default approach that you could build from. You could add more graphs and figures to the middle if you wanted. And then it has a QR code you can scan if you want even more information. So here's a picture of people using it. You have the guy presenting on the right and pointing at things, guy reading silently on the left, and somebody walking by and scanning the QR code and getting a copy of the full paper. And this was really just meant as sort of a new default that kind of contains all the information you'd normally put on a scientific poster, just arranged a little bit more usefully. This went viral across science. People are starting to use this. Generally, if you walk into any conference in science, you'll probably see a couple better posters, which is pretty cool. But now we got to think about like where to go from here based on the feedback we've gotten from people trying this already. So here's sort of a prototype new design. A lot of people I've noticed have put a central figure in the middle. So I've created this new design that would help highlight that central figure. This has a couple more features. It adds an image like the girl looking away from a computer monitor. And the purpose of the image, a lot of people think it's to like add chits or like get attention, or like you could add a cat picture or something, but really it's more important than that. In psychology, when you wanted people to learn something, the best way to do it, or one of the best ways to do it, is to show them the same fact in multiple forms. So you want somebody to learn something as a sentence, as an image, and as a figure. And that's what this does. It sort of helps them elaborate in their mind. And what you'll find, I think, is that people will remember the images even more than they will the text, even if it's a stupid image. And so this adds more imagery. It emphasizes the graph a little bit more. It still includes a summary panel. And then it does something else unique, which is on the bottom, you'll see the names of the authors, kind of like movie credits. And the idea there is that, like in science, again, authors are very, very sacred and important. But when you're presenting a poster, like the attendee, that's the last thing they care about. They need to know your name, the presenter, which is at the top left. They don't care about the 35th author. That's just sort of like superfluous. And so it shoves that down in the visual hierarchy where it belongs is kind of superfluous. Plus you're wearing a name tag. And then we can actually go further than this. So this is kind of what I'm hoping to work on next. If you think about what a poster session should be, if you have an hour, right, you can read one paper, you can go to a symposium and you can see 5 talks on a little bit, like on an area, 1 paper on a narrow topic, 5 talks on an area. If you just filled in the blank, what we should have is poster sessions being more than 5 things, maybe not 25 or 50, but more than 5. And then you should get a much broader sense of what's going on in your whole field. But to do that, posters need to be much faster. So what I'm playing with right now is the idea of, since most poster content isn't read at all, because once you engage with a presenter, you're just looking at the presenter, what we could do is we could build posters where the entire poster contains 45 seconds of content total that can be read at a distance before you approach. So I'm calling this sort of like a lightning poster. And here's an example. You have sort of a translational area on the left where sort of after being betrayed, people with a variant in their oxytocin receptor gene feel angry and retaliate sooner. And then there's the angry guy, so you looking at the betrayal and you can get that sort of burned into your brain. Then if you were walking through a poster session, you'd read that and then you'd pause and you could read each of those 1, 2, 3, 4 method steps in less than 30 seconds. So in less than 45 seconds at a distance, you could read this poster and get the main finding, get it burned into your brain with imagery, and learn the methods, which is more than most posters are communicating right now. If you walk around a poster session and you notice what you actually read on most posters, it's much less than that. If you can get even the main finding in, you're doing very well. We've done some research so far on the default better poster versus the traditional approach, and we found that people prefer it overwhelmingly. We're still publishing research on that. So I have a foster dog tearing up everything in this room. So far, the findings are very, very compelling, even with this default better poster, and we're going to get better from here. So this is really a movement in science towards more efficient poster designs. It started with the version 1 better poster, and we're kind of going from here. The better poster template is available on the Open Science Framework. It's in the public domain. It's completely open access. You can steal it without crediting me, and you can modify it away. So I really recommend checking this out. And with that, I'll, of course, be available for questions at the end, and I'll turn it over back to Leah.
All right, thank you so much, Mike. That was great. While Mike is turning his slides off and Jaap is getting ready to present, let me show our poll results from the poll question about what type of pre-published research you provide as an e-resource for your researchers. 57% posters, 57% presentations, 48% data sets, 83% said preprints, and 4% said others. So that's very interesting there. Thank you for your input. For our next poll, we're going to use the attendee chat function. So the poll question is, what is one thing that would make finding and accessing pre-published research dramatically easier? So we'll just leave that question open. It's an open-ended response. Let us know in the attendee chat if you can just type that in. One thing that would make finding and accessing pre-published research dramatically easier. And with that, I will hand it over to Jaap. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Leah. And I will now open up the correct screen for everybody to see what I am presenting, which should be now my face that you're looking at, and the fact that I'm a human movement scientist. And as Leah thought, I'm working in Amsterdam officially, which is why it's dark behind me right now, because it's 8:30 in the Netherlands. But I also have a position in Australia. And my research is really about aiming to reduce the burden of diabetic foot disease. So it's very specific, and I'm not going to talk about that today. And I'm here. Let's see how my PowerPoint gets working, which is not really doing that. There we go. I'm here because I'm a researcher. So there's no conflict of interest or anything to declare. I'm not in any way related to any of the other presenters. I'm here to present as an end user what my thoughts and feeling are with making early stage research more accessible, and how I think my librarian might be able to help me better, or for you guys, how to understand my end user perspective. So from an end user perspective, why am I interested in early stage research? I think there's three key questions that basically go through my mind almost every day. It's, what are my peers doing? Whom can I collaborate with? Because there's always others who do very much interesting stuff that I would like to work together with. And together you always reach much more than if you want to do it all in your own lab. And you want to know what's hot and what's not. What am I missing out? Am I pursuing something that's absolutely not hot anymore? And these questions I ask myself on a daily, or at least on a weekly basis, to sort of, am I still going on the right track? Where am I heading? And early stage research is really something that could help me answer these questions, because now I look at publications, but as Sami told in the first talk, those are the results of what people have been doing 3, maybe even 4 years ago. Or if I look at my own, it sometimes takes 10 years before you sort of finish the trial and get it finally out there. So that was hot 10 years ago, but not right now. So right now, conferences are really essential in getting access to early stage research. You really have to go there, you have to be there, you have to see what's happening, you have to talk to people. But the big problem of conferences, the two big problems is, first, when the conference is over, it all seems to disappear. And I have my notes and I can scroll through my notes, and some of them are digital, some of them are not digital. And sometimes I can find what I was looking for. More often I can't find what I was looking for, but I do remember and have an email address and I start mailing people. But it's really complex and time consuming to find back what I was thinking about. And the other thing is, I can't go to every conference, and I don't want to go to every conference, but I do want to see some of the content. So we need conferences, we need something better and bigger. So what about preprints? Yes, you do read them, but it's a lot of time and it's not really that very easily accessible. What about unpublished work, metadata, all probably the same. So it's helpful in getting early stage research, but it's still not really user friendly, and it's not really giving me the answers that I want in the time that I want to spend on them. So it is really about sharing your research, sharing your thoughts, and sharing what I am doing with others, but also what others are doing that I would like to share with me. So there must be something that is easier to share than sit and go to a conference, see each other face to face, and talk with each other, or talk via email. There must be better ways to get access to early stage research. And as a researcher, that's what I really need, because I need to share with others what I'm doing. I need others to share with me what they are doing, but we don't have any time for all of this. So why do we really want it? Well, I started thinking about, okay, so what are probably the 3 most important parts for me, apart from answering those first questions, but why would I do it? Well, it definitely increases progress, because if you have more access to early stage research, I think my research will be more efficient, will be more on topic, and will be more relevant. But an even bigger part is probably that it avoids repeating mistakes. An example of my own research, so we're doing lots of research with infrared cameras to detect diabetic foot disease. We've made a lot of mistakes, and we've published, I think, less than half of them, and the others, we just couldn't get them in the papers. And so they're only accessible for the people who really drill down into it. But now that people know that I'm working on infrared and people who would like to work on it, they start asking me questions, and we start having communications via email at conferences. And then I can tell people about my mistakes, and I can tell them, don't do this and don't go there. But if I could share that early stage research, and I could share those mistakes that are no true outcomes, and it will never make it into a proper paper, others can avoid repeating that mistakes without going through the hassle of contacting me answering the emails, etc., etc. And then while I'm doing it right now, I've already discovered a few new collaborators, but if it's more accessible, it's much more easy for people to discover me and for me to discover others that I can work with. So there's lots of reasons why you should share early stage research. And for you guys listening, for librarians, there's lots of reasons why you should probably ask your researchers who come to you, are you interested? How are you looking at it? And because there's definitely clear pros. But then again, you have to consider there are also very obvious cons. And Sami already talked about, okay, you may not want to share something because you want to keep it with yourself until you sort of fully thought it through. But I'll put that aside, and my three biggest cons in early stage research is, the first one is it really rigorous and is it really correct? Because if you're too early, especially in the medical field, what we are seeing is that some big claims are made on early stage research that there's this new cure for this very important disease, and then people are started to hope that it's there, and if it's not rigorous, and then if it's rigorously repeated, they find out, the claim should not be that big, and okay, maybe it doesn't even help. But at the same time, patients may have already started treatment based on it, and then you actually harm people. So especially in patient-related research, you may want to be very cautious about it. You want to be very aware or very assured that it's either rigorous or that it's really early stage and it's not a finding, not a set finding, but it's part of a discussion. So you need something to find out what stage is this. Can we trust it already, or is it in the discussion stage? And another reason why I would not share early stage research is when it requires me additional time. One example is ResearchGate. I use ResearchGate, but every now and then ResearchGate asks me the question, do you have any current projects? And then I need to fill in forms, and I need to explain these projects, and I need to tell more about it. And it cost me at least an hour to do it. And I'm just not prepared to spend that time, because I've got so many ways to spend that hour that are more useful than filling in a ResearchGate project that I'm not sure who reads it and who doesn't read it. So there should be ways to share early stage research that do not require additional time. And the final one, you never know whether or not it's up to date. And sometimes, of course, you keep something a little bit behind you, so because you want to be a bit ahead of the pack. But also what you see is that sometimes things are simply put out there because it's available, even though researchers may already know that's a few years old. So there needs to be a way in there that shows that, okay, this is early stage research, but it's also really fresh and new, and it's not just something that I had available and that I submitted to a conference because I was going there anyway. And yeah, actually we're not working on that line anymore. I was just finding an excuse for my boss to go to the conference. So there's a few reasons why you may want to be a bit more cautious in sharing your early stage research, but the pros generally outweigh the cons, so we just need to balance those cons. So how do I look into the future as an end user, as I said? So what do I see happening, or what would I really like to see happening in early stage research? Because I'm not going to do it myself. I hope for librarians and other people to really help me to it. Well, what I really need is that it should not cost me extra work, or almost no extra work. I'm always prepared to do small bits and pieces if I get something back in return, which is early access to early stage research of others, but it should be in a way that it hardly costs you extra work. It should, and that's very important, be searchable, because there's a lot out there that librarians may find, that I may find myself if I spend a lot of time searching for it. But the search should be really easy, and similar to publications, just give me the results in my email, because I read my email every day, so I can just scroll through it and see it, rather than having to have 5, 6 separate platforms that I need to go to. It needs to be credible, and that's maybe the hardest thing, and Sami referred to the quality assurance. But you need to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff, and we need to find out, is this early stage research that we can trust, or is it something that's made up even? And that could be the biggest question. It's one of the reasons why publications are so much delayed, because you have these checks and balances to find out if it's actually true. And it needs to be up to date. It cannot be something that's from a couple of years ago and then I am going to pursue it. And if that happens too frequently, then I might want to stop using or stop looking at early stage research. So I think those 4 key parts are really needed in the future, but I think it's also feasible. So if I, as an end user, would look at what are my main goals for the future, what would I really like? The first thing that pops into mind is I need access to conference content. Why? At this moment, that's my source for early stage research. And so if I have that access all the time from behind my desk and in a searchable way, that definitely is going to improve the way I get access to the early stage research and the way I get that information. And it should preferably be citable, so that I can also use it in discussions, so that I make it more visible to others, and that others can go and see like, oh, that's really interesting. And if you go now to a conference, so the key conference of my field was a couple of months ago, and I was trying to look up a really important presentation with some important data, and there's just no way I can find it apart from scrolling through all the presentations that were at the conference or sending an email to the guy who presented it. And that's just not the way to move forward. That's not how you open the access. So we need to improve access to conference content. And then the second thing that I always have available are student reports. Lots of my students, whether it's master or PhD students, they do early stage research. They test something out in a small group of patients or in a small group of healthy participants, and they just gonna see, does it work? What problems do we encounter? So some of their student reports actually have really valuable information that I store on my computer, but I can easily share it with others probably, but others will only be able to access it if they can easily find it. And the finding is much more a problem than the sharing. So that needs to be in some sort of collective database, hopefully, so that you can see, what are these students doing? What are they working on? What is it? What information is that giving me, and how can I use that? Something else that we have available, trial registries, preprints, metadata, but it's all really hard to search. It's really hard to find something that's useful. It's really hard to navigate through. So we need to improve the access and the visibility of all of that. And one thing that I would really hope to see visible, and you see it every now and then, are grant submissions, because that's really the differentiating between what's hot and what's not. What are other people thinking about? And why should we always keep these grant submissions to ourselves and confidential, even though you know that sometimes the amount of grants funded is 5 to 10%. So there are so many really good ideas that then are not pursued anymore by others, because they don't know about these ideas, and the researchers who get rejected 2 or 3 times then stop pursuing it because they feel worn out. Whereas if that's all accessible and visible for others, someone else might move it forward, make it even better, but then ask the original grant submitter to collaborate, and you create new collaborations, new people working together, and you really get the most out of these fantastic ideas. So if we would be able to create access to early stage research even before the research is done in the grant submission phase, that might be a really good step that we will get at some point. But for now, it's probably best to at least start accessing conference content and see how far we can grow from there. And for me, as an end user, that would make my life more interesting, would make my research more meaningful, and hopefully help me in pursuing better research and finally combat diabetic foot disease. And with that, I thank everyone very much, and I hand it over to Leah again.
Thank you very much. That was great. Let me go back to our original slide here to share, and I'm going to go read some of the responses for our poll that we, the poll that we did in the chat. if I can get there. Give me just a moment. So the question was, what is one thing that would make finding and accessing pre-published research dramatically easier? Some of the comments we received were index in Scopus or PubMed, if it could be incorporated in our library discovery system, surfacing the results of Google searches to higher on the page, because that's what my researchers are using, a single consolidated repository for these type of materials. So we have one more poll question before we get into the Q&A. I would ask everyone, if you have questions for our presenters, to submit those using that Q&A button that's there at the bottom of your screen. You can type in your questions. But in the meantime, question for the audience is, what was your biggest learning takeaway from this webinar? We'd love to hear. You can, again, either reply to the panelists only, or you can send it to the attendees as well for discussion. So with that, if you want to answer in the chat for the poll question, or submit your Q&A questions for the presenters as well. I'm going to turn my video back on here. So if the panel would like to come back and turn on your video and audio so that we can address questions as they come in, that would be great also.
Hello.
Hi. So questions from the audience or responses to the chat. While we're waiting for some questions, I actually have one. Speaking as a conference organizer, and I'm sure there may be attendees in the audience that are either conference directors or committee members, what are some ways that we can help as we're organizing, as we're thinking about things for next year's conference or in the future? What are some ways that we can help with dissemination of pre-published research, help make a poster session more effective for our attendees, or help it make our presentations more easily discoverable, easily searchable? What are some tips you have for conference organizers?
Yeah, so I'll try to answer that one. Thank you for the question. So I believe my number one goal, and this is something that we are actually seeing in our day-to-day work, is that we encourage the conference organizer to actually make the documents accessible, and this is, you know, all what we have talked about. Essentially, work with a supplier or work with a vendor that understands that it's not only about the experience on the conference itself, by maybe offering now screens, or by offering new types of iPad or computer-based solutions, but actually by opening up the possibility to discover the posters and the presentation before the conference actually even starts. So we have done a couple a little bit of research on that to see, does it actually impact the conference itself if the documents are available before the conference? And actually it does. So there's more, and then a more vibrant communication, more vibrant discussion that is being enabled just by actually opening up the documents before, so people can actually prepare, meet with the people that we like. So I would really look for a vendor that has some sort of platform solutions and that understands to issue DOIs for documents and supports in the dissemination with that.
Sorry about that. I was going to say, any other comments from Jaap or Mike about that question?
Nope. I mean, I think for me, what keeps me up at night is the machine readability of scientific articles, not posters. But like, I mean, it's like there is no HTML for articles. So even beyond a DOI, what we're seeing now is like, if we could get them there, if we could get them in one system with a DOI, that would be such a massive step, because then we could at least have links to a consistent location that would allow for linking in scientific articles. But beyond that, I think I really hope that we end up also developing sort of a markup language for scientific articles, so you can abstract findings very quickly. You need to know like what measures were involved, things like that. So I second what Sami said, and also hope we go towards making them even more machine readable than a normal web page.
Great, thank you. And right on the heels of that, I have a question, how do I get a DOI for my poster and how long will it last?
I don't know the answer to that. I think, like Sami, I think you probably work with DOIs more than me. I'd be interested to know the answer to this one.
Yeah. So again, so either you work with a vendor that actually issues DOI, and Morressier is one. I don't want to advertise it too much here, but we do issue DOIs for posters. And for conferences that work together with us, but there are other vendors and other platforms. I believe that also Figshare does issue DOIs for the posters. So there are platforms and there are solutions out there where you can get a DOI for your poster or presentation.
Great.
Thank you. There's a comment from an attendee that says institutional repositories do too, so that may be another option for DOIs.
Yeah. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if I add to that, I mean, institutional repositories are a really good step forward compared to what we had. But the problem is that they're sometimes pretty hard to search through unless you're really good in manipulating Google. That's the only way to sort of get access to institutional repositories. And what I'm looking at as a researcher is throughout institutions, because I know in one institution is one good researcher in my field, and then there's another one good researcher. And so I would sort of have to keep track of many repositories, but it's a great way to at least make it accessible for others.
Thank you. Here's a question and a comment from Marie. If conference info is available in advance and or after, will this end up decreasing attendance and changing the motivation to attend or present? Then what you have is not a conference, it's a preprint platform.
So I think, I've heard this, yeah, I know that this is a concern. I think I've noticed a paradox with poster design, and that's that if you design a poster so that no one has to stop, more people stop. And I think the same will be true of conferences. If we design conferences so that you actually don't have to attend, like the knowledge is disseminated that efficiently and that engagingly through video and all these other things, and having everything available, you'll get more engagement, I think, at least my hope anyway. And I think the alternative of keeping conferences of this like walled information that only exists in the conference and then dies is much worse than the possibility of people attending less.
Yeah, and I completely agree with what Anne's saying now, is that it's a lower carbon footprint. I mean, that's one of the reasons for me not to, I try to have one overseas conference where I need to fly a year, and that's absolutely the most that I want to do right now. And I should reduce that even further probably. And at the same time, people have said this before, when conferences were opening via that you could watch them via video, and they were expecting that they would sort of dramatically reduce the attendees, but it's not true, because live contact is completely different to getting access to part of what's saying. So having that live contact, having live chat, having the serendipity of it all, there will always be a place for conferences. But I completely agree with what Mike's saying. You just want more people there than those who are prepared to pay and step inside the wall.
Yeah, and maybe one addition, just from an observation from the last years, we haven't seen any reduction of conferences the last years, with all the possibilities of virtual meetings and webcasts and so on and so forth. So it actually is just an addition. And what we see again is we see increased interaction and increased participations on these conferences if they actually share more data and more documents, because then the experience itself is not about just consuming the research that is simply reading, but it actually fosters so much more on these conferences, and people on conference get a much richer experience with other formats. So that's what we see as well.
Great, thank you. Another attendee question, is there a way to get help with producing your poster?
So I think I would start with the Better Poster template that's in the on the Open Science framework. It has, I think, over 200,000 downloads now, which still blows me away. But I think it's a good start. And in that template file, it's not just the Better Poster template. It includes examples from people who've done it, like real people who've tried it. It includes like resources for icons and graphics. It includes like different ways to solve different problems. So if you download that template file and just it's a PowerPoint file, and you just scroll down, you'll see a lot of inspiring examples and things. Past that, I would post if you look, as Anne just said, if you follow me on Twitter at Mike Morisson, not to like self-promote, but like I do retweet every Better Poster that tags me, and so you can see examples there. If you ask me to give you feedback, I'm really terrible at it because I'm a very agreeable person and it's very hard for me to say critical things. But I will try to give you a couple suggestions, and if you free me up and just like sometimes I'll have time available to do a quick redesign or something. I think the biggest thing I'd recommend, and I'll try to shut up in a second, for learning how to get better at posters is be very introspective at poster sessions. Watch people look at your poster and notice what content they use and what content they don't. And then after the session, be like, what could I have removed? What should I have emphasized more? And when you walk around other people's posters, really pay attention to what you actually use out of the poster. You'll find, first of all, that you use about 1/10 of the content, but it's usually the same 1/10, and then you can learn what you liked and what you didn't and what to emphasize. I hope that helps a little bit, but that's what we got right now.
That's great. Thank you.
Something that we have observed, we're in great conversation with a couple of librarians, and they actually, in some cases, open up a researcher service. So within the library, in some institution that we have met, they have actually a support for creating these the posters and material for conferences.
That's great.
Just a side comment here. That's something that could be also within the library domain. To look.
If you have anybody on your staff who's good at design, I would really promote them too. I think that's the biggest mistake I see scientists make, is that they ask other scientists for design help, and it's like, well, they don't know, like they're just as terrible as you are. They're just like, I don't know, more text or whatever. And like, so I think I would also find designers, find people who look to design for help with the design, which is it's going to recommend very different things, which is scary. But be brave, look to design, I guess.
That's good advice. Thank you. And just a note for our attendees also, the slides with the link to the templates will be available on the conference website when we're finished here. Any other questions or comments? Let's see here. There's one. How should I update my poster? So I guess if you're presenting at multiple events, multiple conferences through the year, how frequently should that information be updated?
I think that might be a Sami question.
Well, I was rather looking into Jaap as a researcher.
Okay.
I think you should not have to update it, because as soon as you rely on something that you need others to update, then you know that people are going to lag behind in updating. Because even something that's obligatory, which is for example my medical ethical reports that I have to update every 6 months how my trials are going, I tend to forget unless I specifically put it in my diary and put time and effort in it. So if you would rely on other researchers to update, you can be pretty sure that it's going to be outdated. So I would simply have a new poster when you go to your next conference a couple of months later, because then you will update it because you want to present something new at your new conference. And that conference can be a local, I give local talks to my department 2 or 3 times a year. So then you can you have to update your current research and where you're going. So it's not all these big international conferences, also the small national conferences. In the Netherlands, that's half an hour by train. So don't rely on updates, but make it so that your next poster is going to be your next poster, and just have a clear date stamp. So that was the situation on that date, and then your next poster is your next date. Because if people have to update, people are going to forget.
Great, thank you.
And maybe one observation also from our daily work is that we actually now start to see matches between the posters. So a little bit what you just said, but seeing the evolution from one poster to the other poster to a presentation and then eventually to a published article is something that can actually draw the line quite well, and then we see basically the entire process. So it would be absolutely it would be absolutely interesting to not update it or kind of delete the older version, but actually say, all right, this is the progress that happens. And again, with DOI also referring to the former poster, something that might create interesting new insights and ideas to that world.
Thank you very much. We're getting to the end of our time here with the Q&A sort of pulling to a close here. So I have one last poll question for our audience. Will you make any changes as a result of this webinar? You're going to take anything that you learned here and put it into practice? We hope that you will. As those votes are coming in, I would like to say thank you very much to our participants, to Sami, Mike, and Jaap for being here today. This was really fascinating and I learned a lot. I hope our audience did too. As of right now, it says 92% say yes, that they will make some changes as a result of this webinar, which is good. That's a good learning outcome. I'll give just a few more seconds for votes. It looks like things are slowing down just a little bit there. But I do hope that everyone has a great day and comes back to the next Charleston Conference webinar in our series. Yeah, it looks like it's saying here at 93% say yes. So thanks to everyone for participating. Thank you for answering our questions with the polls and the chat. Have a great day, and we'll see you back here next time. Thanks a lot. Bye, everybody.
See you guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. Thank you.
See you soon.